Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and distinguished participants, welcome to our virtual high-level event called Reducing the Risks of Climate Overshoot in Developing Countries. It is an honor to have each of you joining us today for this crucial discussion on addressing the pressing challenges of climate change in the context of developing economies. My name is Sungkur. I am a member of the Climate Overshoot Commission's Youth Engagement Group. I am from Mauritius, and I will be the moderator for this event today. Climate change stands as one of the most pressing and intricate challenges facing our world today. The urgency of this challenge is unmistakable, reflected in the rising frequency of record-breaking temperatures and the escalating impacts felt globally, particularly in vulnerable developing countries. The risk of climate overshoot, that is, exceeding the Paris Agreement goal of limiting average global warming to 1.5 degrees, is substantial and increasing. Alongside it is the risk of exacerbating impacts on human health, food security, water availability, social stability, and ecosystems. No country would be immune from such consequences. However, the least industrialized countries, despite contributing minimally to the problem, will disproportionately bear the brunt of these impacts. That is why climate change is an issue of justice, because failure to act today would exacerbate future risks. It is also an intergenerational issue. And because impacts undermine the full enjoyment of human rights, climate change could also be called a human rights issue. The interests of the most industrialized countries disproportionately drive the agenda, while those of low and middle income countries are frequently overlooked, ignored, or treated as less important. Despite their financial means, industrialized countries have not made it a priority to meet the least industrialized countries' critical need for climate finance. Today, the poorest countries with limited financial resources feel that they have to choose between cutting emissions and other pressing issues, such as reducing poverty. This event aims to delve into the details of the rising tensions between the global South and the global North and explore the best pathways to support developing economies in their energy transition while simultaneously meeting their climate and development objectives. So it is with great honor and enthusiasm that I welcome our distinguished panel of speakers today, each of whom brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion on this crucial topic. I am always and truly inspired by their dedication and expertise in addressing the challenges of climate change. So allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. First is His Excellency Anote Tong, former president of Kiribati and member of the Climate Overshoot Commission, renowned internationally for his advocacy work on climate change and ocean conservation. Then is Samson Cheng, Schwarzman Scholar and Rhodes Scholar with extensive involvement in climate diplomacy and advocacy in many UN conferences such as SB 56, COP27, and the Biodiversity COP15. Next is Dr. Alan Halimatusadia, the head of Research Cluster on Green Economy and Climate Change at the Institute for Economic and Social Research at the University of Indonesia, who will enrich our understanding on sustainable development with expertise in environmental economics. And finally, Ahmed Ashraf Biri, who is the program director at Trend Asia, with a diverse background in environmental advocacy and leadership roles in organizations such as Greenpeace. With such esteemed speakers joining us today, I'm confident that our discussion will be both enlightening and impactful. So without waiting anymore, my first question will be directed to you, Mr. President. You have been one of the most prominent voices on climate change and its impact on developing economies, specifically on the devastating consequences for small island states. Do you believe that developing economies, aside from emitting little but suffering major consequences, can unite as a single bloc and speak with one voice? Mr. President, the floor is to you.
Thank you. Let me begin by acknowledging thanking the organizers for giving me this opportunity to tell my story once again. It's a story that I've been telling over the last couple of decades or so. You've said it, Mr. Moderator. It's a sad story that much of what is happening is actually being dictated by the industrialized nations. But I think more importantly, are the countries, is it the countries that are dictating the agenda, or is it the corporations that are dictating the agenda? And I think this is the question that we must address. And I think perhaps this is the failure that we have made, not directing the question to the right people. Okay, and over the years I've often pondered over that, and of course it's really if we cannot be directing the question at the right people, then I don't know that we can succeed in moving forward. Over the years, I've seen changes in the way the momentum of the climate action has taken. A lot more young people have been involved, and I think this is very, very good indeed. But at the same time, in spite of the massive momentum, increase in momentum, I don't know if we are making much headway. I recall the time when I started talking about this and talking about the the fossil fuel industry and how they were very active in invalidating the report, the science of the IPCC. But then they disappeared, and I wondered where did they disappear to. And then it occurred to me that maybe they've redefined their strategy and actually gone and manipulating our own governments. And I think you see what's happening in our governments in our part of the world, Australia with the changing government, there goes the change in policy on climate change. The United States, New Zealand, and all the other countries. With a change in administrations, there's usually a change on climate policy. This is very, very, very sad because, climate change does not recognize political divisions. And so I don't think we have a choice but to try to address this in whatever way. The alternatives are just not acceptable. We cannot accept not being able to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. President. My next question is to you, Samson, and it is a pretty provocative question that I have for you. So there's an increasing discussion about emerging economies that are now emitting more per capita than historic emitters in the North. As a young person, what is your perspective on the responsibility of developing economies in global warming? And what are your perspectives that are going beyond the moral imperative for financial and technical support from the North?
Right. Thank you for the question, and also thank you for having me here today. It's truly my honor. Actually, last December, I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Lamy and Kahid from the Climate Overshoot Commission at the Schwarzman College in Beijing, where I gained invaluable insights from the groundbreaking work of the commission. So really appreciate it. And addressing your question, I think it is essential to first acknowledge that most of the developing countries exhibit actually lower per capita emission than developed country nowadays. For instance, like India's per capita emission are around 1.6 metric tons, significantly lower than the EU's 7.4 and the US 30 metric tons. And also, in terms of the historical per capita emissions of emerging economies remain significantly lower than those of developed countries. And at the same time, these emerging economies are playing crucial roles in the global supply chain. So I think, therefore, this again underscores the principle of common but differentiated responsibility in no matter it is international climate discourse or like reflecting the unequal historical contribution to global greenhouse gas levels. But however, I think it is indeed crucial to avoid a carbon-intensive and carbon lock-in development from emerging economies as well. Research from my university, Tsinghua University, published in Nature Communication, along with findings presented at COP28, suggests an anticipated increase in carbon dioxide emissions by 8.6 gigaton from emerging economies to meet decent living standards, especially in mobility and electricity. And this scenario presents a dual challenge and opportunity. As developing countries grow, their energy demand and emission will grow as well. Yet this growth provides a unique chance to adopt sustainable development pathways, diverging from the high carbon models of industrialized nation. Key strategy for emerging economies include investing in green transportation and renewable energy, thereby reducing emissions while enhancing living standards. Initiatives, I think, should focus on promoting public transportation and harnessing wind, solar, and hydrogen energy, alongside considering carbon capture and storage, which is emphasized by the Commission a lot for existing fossil fuel systems. And for developed nation, I think reducing the extra consumption can liberate carbon space for emerging economies to develop sustainably. And there are also data indicates that in 2019, consumption levels in developed countries in areas such as nutrition, water, transport, and health for exceed the minimum threshold for decent living standard, consuming significant and emission space that could benefit developing countries. By curbing unnecessary consumption, developing countries can facilitate a pathway for the sustainable growth for emerging economy. And last but not least, I think achieving this balance necessitates extensive support from developed countries, not only, as you have mentioned, through financial and technological transfer, but also via equitable trade policy, and also investment in sustainable projects, also capacity building efforts. And I believe a global framework that champion sustainability, and also carbon pricing, renewable energy promotion, even penalize environmental degradation is imperative for fostering a cooperative international approach to climate change.
Thank you, Samson, for your answer. So my next question is to you, Dr. Alin Halimatusadia. So according to the World Bank, financing needs for climate action vary significantly among different countries, with lower middle income and low income countries facing substantial financial requirements. How, according to you, can low and middle income countries effectively work towards closing this financial gap in climate finance? I know it's been a question that we've been putting on the table for such a long time now, but it is getting urgent. According to you, how can they work towards closing this gap?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And thanks for having me here. I'll try to answer your question. So Global South suffer more than industrialized country. The estimation of GDP losses of the impact of this climate change for low-income countries is projected as double than the global average, by the next centuries. And it requires a massive financing, and it is estimated that climate adaptation funding gap is about 50% higher than what has been estimated. Because I want to focus on adaptation here, that it's more related to the need of Global South countries. And regarding this financing gap, we are aware that the financing capacity of low and middle income countries to tackle climate impact is not as strong as high income countries. So the question is where we can find the money to cover the shortfall of the funding. In COP28, the issue of adaptation finance has been extensively discussed, and some countries has pledged fund for that. But it is still below the required level. And if we learn from the 100 billion USD climate finance commitment, there is a risk that this commitment cannot be fulfilled or realized. And there are several things need to be done, I think. First is, I think low and middle income countries need to have a bigger voice. So we need to increase the capacity of climate negotiators throughout the Global South. They need a good representative with a bigger role in the international forum and agreement, including at the multinational development banks and also regional development banks. So the Global South, I think, need to make strategic alliance for this issue. And the Global South need to make sure this commitment become real. Most of the time needed from the commitment to become reality is too long. Many things have to be done, such as developing the plan, the institution frameworks, such as global goal on adaptation and other things. So we need to shorten the process, because if we act slow, the loss and damage will be raising. The next issue I want to discuss is about mobilizing non-public funding, particularly private finance. The capacity of low and middle income countries for financing adaptation is low, not to mention lack of priority of the government in this area. So mobilizing private finance is hard for adaptation. It's already hard for mitigation, and it harder for adaptation. And unlike mitigation, most of adaptation project is not commercial or less commercial. So logically, the incentive for industrialized countries to finance adaptation is lower because they are less likely can materialize the benefit. In mitigation, particularly in the energy sector, the flow of finance is quite smooth because industrialized countries can sell their technology and develop their industry. Adaptation has intangible benefit mostly. That's why it is important to develop some kind of metrics or indicators of performance, which is acknowledged by financial markets so they can internalize the benefit into their balance sheet. So we need to develop not only market for carbon, for example, but also development indicators such as poverty reduction and health improvement. And any initiative to bundling mitigation with adaptation is very potential to tap in climate funding. Private finance is motivated by return on investment. Without agreeing on what is the return, they will not have the interest to invest. And the role of philanthropy also important to leverage the private investment, but I don't think we can meet the scale needed from philanthropy. So we still need public funding to leverage this private finance. We need also many cases, successful cases, initiative of private funding to demonstrate what is working and how it works to bring a bigger scale of financing. My last point is how to make the process of accessing the fund easier. There are many frameworks, paperwork, and other requirements that sometimes beyond the capacity of countries or project developers to fulfill. We need trust to build trust here. We need to reduce administrative costs and also transaction costs of financing. We need innovative framework. We need also to make the procedure shorter and faster regarding project proposal, assessment, funding disbursement, monitoring, and evaluation. So it should be, the procedure should be simpler and faster, but robust enough to make sure that the impact happen at the right scale. I think that's my response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Halimatu Sadia. You highlighted very much important points. One sentence that I really heard was that low and middle income countries must have a bigger voice. And one of these spaces are conferences of parties. So it links perfectly with my next question for Dr. Ahmed Ashraf-Biri. So COP28 commitments this year, they aim to triple renewables in the next decade. Yet some doubts that the feasibility of such ambitions are too big, that the promises are way too much. What is your take on this, and how does your country fare in terms of renewable energy adoption?
Yeah, thanks, Yves, for the question. And I think the goal is worth to be achieved. We all have, we all have all of the imperative to achieve that in terms of the climate crisis and the risk ahead. But yes, it will need ideal condition, enabling condition to achieve that for sure. And I agree with Mr. Anote before that at least in Indonesia, coal addiction is one of the problem, and behind that it's a coal interest which is capturing not only state but also regulation. For instance, in Indonesia, there is a sign that the government will lower their ambition in terms of renewable energy mix. So they plan to lower the target from 23% by 2025 of renewable energy mix to 17 to up until 19% of renewable energy mix. While ideally, Indonesia needs to achieve 40 to 45% of renewable energy mix by 2030. So need to add 60 to 70 gigawatt of renewable energy. But at the same time, there is a plan to lower the ambition to phase in RE, but at the same time, coal is still, how do you say, king in Indonesia. Even in the last electricity business plan, there is still 13.8 gigawatts of new coal power plant plan to be developed. Also at the same time, for the captive one, because in Indonesia right now there is a hype of nickel or transition minerals, not only mining but also smelting of it, which needs power, of course, and most of them will come from coal power plant, and there is still plan to add 12.8 gigawatts. So there is a chance for Indonesia to draw back its peak emission target for 7 to 10 years. But yeah, so there is a challenge in that, and we need enabling condition. One of it is, of course, how to break away from the fossil interests, including in our government, in our governance. And I would like to highlight that the goal is not only tripling up RE, but also doubling up energy efficiency. I think is going to be very important in terms of projection of overshoot. So we need to take a look at energy efficiency as a how do you say, as a opportunity for development as well, as a source of growth as well, because it's of course Indonesia need, or a country like Indonesia need is development, not only development but just development. So other things that needs to be highlighted is that in terms of democratization of energy in Indonesia, because high targets and we need everyone to participate on it, right? It's very easy logically, but in Indonesia, for instance, in terms of democratization is also in danger. For instance, in terms of solar rooftop regulation in Indonesia, in a nutshell, government is taking away incentives for the citizens to participate in terms of renewable energy. That would be my answer for now.
Thank you, Ahmed. So my next question is for you, Samson. So Ahmed was talking about breaking away from the fossil fuel industry. At COP28, discussions on phasing out fossil fuels began. Personally, do you believe that a differentiated phase out with developed countries ceasing use immediately is realistic given the current pace of fossil fuel consumption? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's much more difficult than even tripling the renewables in my perspective. But yeah, thank you for the question. I think the discussion about phasing out fossil fuels in an equitable and just manner marks a pivotal moment in our global recognition of the urgent need to address climate change. However, being an engineering researcher, despite the urgency and the compelling moral argument for such measures, my research and understanding of the energy system suggests that a complete phase out of fossil fuels might not be immediately feasible. It might not sound like ideal, but notably, even climate leaders like the European Union have not yet included a full fossil fuel phase out in their climate targets. This sometimes leads to huge confusion for myself as well, especially when seeing active advocacy for fossil fuel phase out, as well as the discussion at the previous 3 COPs meeting since COP26 in Glasgow. However, I would love to clarify that my stance is not rooted in the economic convenience or the traditional dominance of fossil fuels. In fact, in my opinion, renewable sources like solar and wind are becoming increasingly cost-effective compared to fossil fuels, which are becoming more expensive and harder to extract at high quality. The argument of maintaining a role of fossil fuel in our energy mix is based on its stability and flexibility. Power plants fueled by fossil fuels don't necessarily need to operate at full capacity or continuously in the future. They could play a crucial role in ensuring energy security, especially as we increase the share of clean energy in our mix, which may face instability or sudden shocks. Also, this doesn't mean we can use fossil fuel without control. Energy transition is crucial. It's still crucial. I often emphasize the need to minimize our reliance on fossil fuels as much as possible, enhancing, as mentioned just now, efficiency and employing necessary carbon capture technologies to mitigate the environmental impact. But in navigating this transition, I agree that developed nations should do more and faster, providing developing countries with more time to transition. But there are a few critical factors must be considered as well, no matter in developed or developing countries. I think which comes first will be political will. Successful low carbon transition demands a strong political commitment from all nations, especially those with significant fossil fuels industry. Developed countries must lead by demonstration, showing that a swift transition to renewable energy is feasible. Second will be economic factor. Our global economy is currently deeply intertwined with fossil fuels, meaning that moving away from them necessitates significant investment in renewable infrastructure, technology innovation, and also workforce reskilling. This economic implication could be substantial, particularly for economies heavily reliant on fossil fuels for energy and revenue. And third, also the last, is the social and economic equity. I think an equitable and just transition is imperative. This involves mitigating the social and economic impacts on communities dependent on the fossil fuel industry, creating new jobs opportunity in the renewable sector, and ensuring access to affordable clean energy for everyone. So to conclude shortly, while the ambition of low carbon transition is both necessary and commendable, the path forward requires a realistic, balanced approach to consider energy security, economic implication, and the equitable treatment for all nations and communities.
Thank you, Samson. So my next question is for you, Your Excellency. As you all know, rising sea levels pose an existential threat to small island nations. However, it sometimes feels like the international community has been quite reluctant to address the concept of climate refugees and climate mobility. I know that there are initiatives that are being taken at the international level, such as the creation of the Global Center for Climate Mobility, where I've even been one of the delegates at COP27 as a youth delegate. But it still feels like it is a new concept that is slowly getting introduced into global discussions. According to you, where do you think we can apply pressure and advocate for this topic to become central in climate debates?
I think you're raising one of the most complex questions. But let me begin by perhaps identifying the problem before we can suggest a solution. I think in all of the problems that we're facing with a global problem like climate change, is that we don't have an effective international governance system to deal with that. Okay, unlike what we have at the national level, we have national laws to deal with national issues. We don't have a similar effective international regime to deal with that, and this is the heart of the problem. Because what ideally needs to happen is to be able to control the actions of those that are actually doing damage unnecessarily. But of course, we don't have an effective international regime to deal with this. And I think this is where perhaps this is where, and it happens at every level. And until we can identify an effective system for dealing with these global international challenges, it is going to be difficult to prescribe credible solutions. And I think that the comments that were made earlier, it requires international political will. Is there such a thing as international political will? No. Look at what's happening around the world, different parts of the world at this moment in time. You know, we've got countries having a go at each other, battling at every level, strategically, even militarily, economically, and we need a cohesive international political will. And until we can do that, maybe it is time. I was involved with an exercise to examine how effective the United Nations has remained in light of the new challenges which are emerging. And I think the sad answer is it's not. It's becoming less effective today, from perhaps in solving the problems of the post-Second World War. It is no longer the organization that is equipped to deal with the challenges of today, because again, I go back to the point that I was making earlier, that maybe governments are not as effective as they'd like to think that they are. It is the corporations that are actually more effective in mobilizing and controlling the international agenda. And I think I think we need to go back and address these issues before we can prescribe solutions, because we can prescribe as much as possible, but those very powerful interests will continue to undermine our very governments, you know, to undermine the effectiveness of our governments in order to be able to deliver on those pronouncements. And so I think this is where we need to direct our focus. This is where attention needs to be focused. You know, question, we're trying to solve today's problem and the future problem with maybe yesterday's system. And I think maybe we need to relook at what it is that we have and to ask the question, is it able to deal with the challenges that are currently facing our global community at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we talked a lot about the global level. I would like to discuss a little bit more about the more local, national level. So my next question is to Dr. Halima Tusadia. How can we advance and support local adaptation in the face of massive gaps in adaptation finance? What do you think are the measures needed to enhance national ownership and local contributions to adaptation efforts?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nick. When we talk about adaptation finance, I think we need to look not only from the supply side, but also from the demand side. And I want to relate your question with the demand side issue. Currently, only about, I think, 50 developing countries submitted national adaptation plans to the UNFCCC. So the point is, when we ask for money, we need to know what for, and we need to know, and we need to show either what is our adaptation plan. So countries has to know what to do to tackle the climate change. And in order to do that, they need to make assessment on what is the problem, where, and what need to do. So what is the action needed? Countries need to integrate adaptation plan with their national development strategies. And this kind of process can be exhausted and long, and to make sure the voice of interests of the grassroots are accommodated in the plan. So we want to make the process inclusive. And inclusiveness of the process in making national adaptation strategies can be complex, particularly looking at the bureaucracy and the institutional setting in the least and developing countries. So decentralizing the plan and implementation, including financing strategies, is crucial given the situation. The problem with adaptation finance is not only where we can get the finance, but also where is the project. So we need to have a lot of project proposal in the pipeline. And capacity building is needed to spread the initiative from the grassroots to develop good and credible adaptation project. We need to incentivize the locals to reveal their preference about what project they want to develop, and they can also reveal traditional knowledge. And maybe low and middle income countries also need to increase their capacity to do all of this, and to do this they need support. And the awareness of climate impact and the importance of climate adaptation need to be backed up by a good data and research, and this can be expensive for these countries. The politicians, policymakers, and local leaders also need to know all of these things, because they are the one who have important role in budget allocation. Because lack of evidence can bring lack of priority, including for budget allocation. Low and middle income countries need to have a commitment to increase their domestic resource mobilization by putting carbon tax, for example, or windfall profit, and also remove harmful subsidies such as fossil fuels, and it can be hard for them. Most of the time, they have quite pragmatic view on this and need a good narrative to implement this because of political consideration. NGO, CSO, research institution like universities and think tanks can contribute to shape this narrative. Global South countries also need to develop good institutions to implement adaptive social protection. Because climate change, particularly climate-related disaster, make the mobility of people getting in and out of poverty become faster. So the package of social protection also need to be expanded, and it has to include support to increase the resiliency and improve the livelihood of the people. Yeah, I think that's my response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. So, Ahmed, going back to you, should low and middle income countries consider greater involvement in governance and research debates on carbon capture technologies? Would you think this is a beneficial aspect to consider, all while considering all the inevitability of these debates? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think we're going to need a serious debate on it in public in terms of carbon capture technology effectiveness, efficiency in terms of energy consumption, as well as regarding its price or cost, and who's going to bear that cost, and how we are going to finance that. Of course, it needs to be bared by polluters. That's the principle, I guess, polluters pay principle. But the way that it is being applied in Indonesia, we know that it will be eventually citizens who will bear that cost, and in terms of benefit, it will be on the side of fossil fuel industries. So and yeah, I mean, we need to have that debate. Of course, I believe that one of the underlying problem is about the development, the needs of development. But I think we're going to need to talk also about the LMIC, I mean, low middle income countries' relation with developed countries. Of course, the ideal one would be, in terms of emission reduction, is that drastic and dramatic reduction in developed countries, and low middle income countries develop, but in a way that just and low carbon, right? So in terms of carbon capture, of course, the worry is that there will be transfer of emission or trade of emission from developed countries to low and middle income countries, which is not fair. And I think in terms of how countries like Indonesia should develop as well, I think it's related to that, or how Indonesia could industrialize their nation. I think it's important to ask what kind of industry that Indonesia really need, and what would be the priority. So there is important element there that Indonesia needs to solve first, which is the needs of land reform, because we would like to have a just and sustainable development. Without that, there will be many conflicts, as it happens now. And land reform and needs to respect the indigenous people as well, and their rights, of course, because it is happened right now in terms of decarbonization, in terms of energy transition. There is many conflict that is happening because of that problem. So we need to solve that one by one. But in order for countries like Indonesia to be able to, how do you say, to develop develop in a way that really benefit their people, I think it needs also some kind of reform, not only in Indonesia but also in terms of developed country and low middle income countries relation. I think that would be my answer to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed. So my last question before going to the Q&A, and thank you for all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. Mr. President, so I would like now for you to put your commissioner's hat on. With the majority of commissioners on the Climate Overshoot Commission hailing from developing economies, how did this influence the Commission's recommendations and the formation of the CARE agenda? And is the CARE agenda conducive to the interest of low and middle income countries? And according to you, can it be easily adopted and adapted by them?
Okay, it's as I said again, I want to repeat what I said earlier, that you know, there's such a range of between the vulnerability level of the different countries, and whether we can say that what is happening on climate change is affecting the different countries in the same, and that is definitely not the case. I mean, I've always advocated that we're on the front line of the impacts of climate change, simply because our islands are barely 2 meters above sea level. Just this weekend, okay? No, last weekend, we had the new moon, and let me get this out. We're getting 2.2 meters of tide. Now that is higher than we normally do get. And so on my back porch, the water was coming over. Now that is in dead calm. If we had a bit of a breeze, that would be serious, okay? And so the countries on the front line, the very vulnerable countries, we're talking about the change in weather. I mean, if there should be the change in the weather pattern, we don't get cyclones because we create cyclones. We send them south or north, but we don't get them, or we're not supposed to get them. But it is changing. In 2015, we had the cyclone Pam coming up from Vanuatu, and it went back to the equator, hit Tuvalu, flooded all of the islands of Tuvalu, flooded our southernmost islands. And so it's the changes in the weather pattern that perhaps are the more immediate danger. But the sea level will continue to rise. There's been a group of researchers suggesting that the islands have always risen in line with the rise in sea level. I don't know if that would continue to be the case, because things have changed. The climate is changing. The rate of sea level rise is changing, and whether the land formation, the rate of land formation, will be able to keep in track with what is happening. And so we are looking at a very disastrous future. I have advocated that we should be looking at options like building our resilience, adapting, building our climate resilience, but at the same time, explore the options of migrating to nearby countries. And I know I'm often criticized for advocating that, but I think that is the only practical options that, if with the melt of the huge icebergs coming from the south, okay? I don't know what the implications would be, but my understanding is that if all of the Greenland ice sheet melts, it's a 7-meter rise in sea level. We're even less than 2 meters above sea level. And so we are facing some very severe challenges in the future. I don't think our future can be guaranteed. And the question will be, and that question has never been answered, what are we to do? What are we to do? And so let me end on that challenging question, because it's a question that I've always been wanting an answer to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this wonderful answer. So thank you to all the panelists. I will now go in the second phase of this event, which are the Q&A session. So once again, thank you very much for the audience to have putting so many questions. In the interest of time, I won't be able to tell every single question, but panelists, if you are happy to answer some of the questions live, of course, please do it. So the first question is from Félicien. So the question is the following: what strategies should industrialized countries employ to not only mitigate their substantial direct and indirect contributions to climate change, but also proactively identify and seize the growth opportunities that arise from tackling climate change issues, thereby fostering sustainable development and economic expansion? So I won't be pointing out who should answer. Please feel free if you are happy to do it. The floor is yours.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to answer this
Have a go.
question. Yeah, okay. If you mention industrialized countries, I think they almost have no problem maybe regarding this issue. Yeah, they have the money, they have the technology, and they actively look for the potential market to sell their technology. They also extensively discuss how this climate action integrated to their economic, industrial, and their social protection policy, and the institutional setting there already established, the market works, and the statistics are almost complete, because statistics is important to make a good planning, yeah, and also to deploy or to provide, for example, targeted social protection. And they also have a solid chain, yeah, from the basic research, applied research, until how they can reap the benefit through commercialization of the research. So they can build their industry, their green industry, yeah, because of this decarbonization or like, you know, like green economic policy. So yeah, so I don't think they have so many issues on this. The problem is whether low and middle income countries can mirroring this strategy, because I don't think we can completely import, yeah, their strategy. We have to make a lot of adjustment on their strategy. Yeah, maybe Mr. President can say something about this, how how to operationalize this strategy in different countries, particularly least and developing countries. Thank you.
Okay, if I may add, I was reluctant to have a first go because I've just been speaking too much. But again, it's a question of goodwill. Okay, do we have the goodwill to, in order to sustain? As a global community, we have huge challenges. The population is increasing drastically. Our ability to sustain the global population is becomes a problem every time. And of course, at the heart of all of this, and it's interesting that every time we speak or we hear people speaking, and I must admit, this annoys me a little bit, somewhat, when I listen to talking the various conferences, including the COP meetings that I've attended. It's always about the dollar, the money. You know, can we make money? You got to be able to incentivize people to do the right thing by providing them some kind of return in terms of dollar return. And there is no goodwill that would say, let's do this because this is the right thing. To do something else is damaging, if not to me, to somebody else on the other side of the planet. And so this has been the complaint that we have, that I have been saying in all over the world, really. And every forum that I've spoken at, it's about trying to get people to place a value on different things rather than just you know, if it doesn't make money, then let's not do it. Okay, let's keep doing what it is that makes us money, and this is exactly what keeps the fossil fuel industry going, because they can still make a lot of money, and so there is no incentive for them to cut back on it, and because they also believe that they can buy their way out of the problem when it comes, and of course the sad reality is this: they'll be the ones that will best be able to maybe book a flight to the next planet, which we can. Okay, and seriously, I cannot understand because the science is very clear, very clear. Yet we are doing everything but listening to the science. I don't know. I think as human beings, it is sad that we are not. We profess to be good Christians, to be good religious people. Yet at the same time, we're doing everything wrong. We're doing the very things that hurt the people next to us. And so let's, if we can move away from the dollar, maybe it's our economic system, which is the problem, where the capitalism is greed is great, okay? And I'm afraid I have that problem. I don't know if how others feel about this, but maybe that is the heart of the evil that we're trying to deal with here. Unless we can deal with that, unless we can become nicer people, more considerate, more compassionate, I'm afraid that it's going to be a very difficult problem to address. Thank you. I hope I added to your answer, Doctor.
Thank
Right,
you.
I
Yes,
would love
please.
to add on a little bit. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. I agree a lot, like President Tong just mentioned. We should like act just because it's the right thing to do, but not because like it's like profit driven because of the benefit. But very unfortunately, I think like business nowadays or even like previously pretty, I would say, practical or like realistic for them. So I actually like the angle of this question, like whether they can like actively find opportunity of addressing climate change. And in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily bring to economic expansion, but for sure leads to avoidance of climate risk. It can be like two kinds of risk. One will be like physical risk and political risk. Physical is like if your enterprise actually have property in coastal cities or like vulnerable place that can like experience flooding or drought, addressing climate change actually help your property to like stay away from climate risk. And but another huge risk will be political risk that given the trend of like the global trend of addressing climate change and also different domestic policy, it is actually better for business enterprises to act earlier to lower their emission, lower their environmental impact in order not to be regulated by domestic and international society. So yeah, so I will take this question as not to create more economic benefit, but in a realistic way to avoid potential loss if not addressing climate change. So yeah, I believe this will be a sustainable measure for realistic business to consider the effect of addressing climate change.
Thank you, Samson. So in the interest of time, I will ask two more questions from the audience. The first one is to all the speakers. What is your position on carbon capture, given the unfairness that Mr. Beery argued about? Maybe Samson, if you would like to go back to back.
Right. I am not an expert in carbon capture, I would say, but yeah, just some intuitive opinion on this. I see carbon capture nowadays as still not yet well researched and also still very costly, right? And but there is a heat wave, like a big wave of carbon capture to see like its potential usage in the like far away future. I believe, in my opinion, carbon capture will be necessary, especially in reaching net zero globally and also like within different countries. But definitely, it is not the first mitigation technology or strategy we should adopt nowadays. There are much more like cost-effective and efficient way to do, and we can like if invest in like researching the technology itself, but not to adopt it in a very early stage. At the end, we might think about, okay, there are still some hard to abate sectors like fossil fuel plants, cement, steel producing factories that we can install carbon capture. But I think we should wait, research more and see. Yes.
Yeah, if I may add to this. Yeah, I think carbon capture is important, and investing in research in this also important to reduce the cost of this technology. But please bear in mind that man-made carbon capture is not necessarily reducing air pollution. Yeah. So coal-fired power plant, for example, like CCS or CCUS, it might still release air pollution. So it is not solve all the problem. Yeah. And we also have to look at the man-made versus nature-based solution for this carbon capture. And nature-based solution, I think it is cheaper, and we have to have a good strategy also to promote this nature-based solution. And it is also important that to look at this carbon capture technology maybe as the strategy to lengthen the fossil fuel industry, to make their economic life longer. So I think we have to learn more about this, the interest of the industry, and what is the optimal way to deploy this kind of technology. Thank you.
If I can just add here, if I may, I've been watching in the negotiations all of these things that come up, okay, like carbon capture, carbon trading, and we're missing the whole the critical issue. And the critical issue is to cut back on emissions rather than try to pretend that we have some way through our technology make it better. It's not happening. I think we're talking about geoengineering to cool. These distractions are placed there by those interests which do not want to see cutting of the use of fossil fuel. And so we need to be a little careful in those solutions. But if they can be effective, why not? If geoengineering, what there was, geoengineering solutions, if they will work, I think we perhaps at the stage where we need to take to use these somewhat radical solutions and maybe untested solutions, because we might be coming, and I make the point that according to the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, regardless of whether we cut emissions tomorrow, the momentum of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will continue to drive global temperatures and sea level rise, and ensure that our islands will be underwater by the end of the century. According to the sixth assessment report, this has moved forward to 2060. So anything that would make that happen, yes, indeed, but let it not be an excuse to continue doing what we are doing today. Business as usual. It will not work. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Maybe one last question before ending this wonderful discussion. How can we incentivize the World Bank and other regional development banks to showcase more flexibility in their funding and to consider energy transition as an investment and not a loan? Dr. Halimatu Sadia, you talked about how the process of getting the fund is maybe too complex or too complicated. What are your thoughts on how we can incentivize the development banks to showcase more flexibility?
Yeah. This is a difficult question, but I think to make their involvement more on this to become an investment rather than a loan, I think we need to change their risk appetite. So whether they want to absorb more risk or not. Yeah, because lender is usually their preference toward risk is less than the investor. Yeah, so I think this is the problem because development financial institution like the World Bank or regional development banks has many stakeholders, and whether this risk appetite, the level of risk, the risk level needed, yeah, to make the financing more applicable to many climate project is accepted by these stakeholders because it reflects the preference of the risk of all these stakeholders. That's maybe the problem. Actually, the regional development banks and also multilateral development banks already absorb more risk than private financial institution, but we need to make them absorb more risks. Actually, that's I don't know whether they want to do that or not. Yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our audience to have participated in this event. It is now, I will now close the event. Thank you so much for our participants. Thank you for attending the webinar. And of course, if you would like to know more about the Climate Overshoot Commission and its report, you can always go on the Climate Overshoot's website, where you will be able to learn more about reducing the risks of climate overshoot and its impact on developing economies. Once again, panelists, thank you so much. To the audience, thank you for coming, and I hope to see you soon.